Okay, today is all about just introducing the idea of confidence intervals. And it is the basics, interpreting the interval, stuff like that. So let's get right to it. So a point estimator, statistics that provide an estimate for the population parameter. So we're trying to estimate the population parameter. The value is simply called the point estimate. So you might hear this if you ever heard of a presidential poll and it said, 48% are going to vote for Biden or something like that, then that means that's the point estimator. That is we're estimating what we think might happen for the percentage of the population. So we're trying to estimate that. A confidence interval is known as an interval estimate. So it gives a set of plausible values for a parameter based on sample data. So it's an interval. So again, going back to the 48% for Biden, so that really has a confidence interval, a plus or minus margin of error of 3%. So we're really saying 48 plus 3 or 51% at the high end of that interval, and 48 minus 3 is 45%. So really we're talking about an interval from 45% to 51%. That's called a confidence interval. And we're trying to capture the true proportion of people who voted for Biden or whatever it is we're measuring there. So anything in that range, 45 to 51, is a plausible value. Plausible just means, like it could happen, right? Without being too unusual. So we're not saying, as statisticians, we're not saying we're great estimators. We have a range. We kind of hedge our bets a little bit, and that's called a confidence interval or interval estimate. You don't hear that term very much. We always just call it a confidence interval. How do you interpret one? So if they say interpret the confidence interval, to interpret, let's say a 90% confidence interval for an unknown parameter, say, this is what we say. We are 90% confident, or whatever the C value is there, that the interval from 45 to 51% captures the true percentage of folks who will vote for Biden, or whatever the context is of that statement. So we're 95% confident the interval from blank to blank captures the true either mean or proportion is typically what we're finding there. Okay, so that's a good point. I like these exam tips. So make sure you're describing the population parameter, not the statistic. We're not saying that our sample goes from there. We're trying to say the true amount of people that will vote for Biden, right? The parameter there, the proportion of folks who will vote for a certain candidate. So it's wrong to say we're 95% confident the interval from blank to blank captures the proportion of U.S. adults who said they volunteered for the previous 12 months. That implies it's a sample. If you talk like that, who would say, you could say who would say, or of all people who could vote, or something like that. We're talking about the population parameter there. So the National Health and Nutrition Exam Survey is an ongoing research program. Based on a random sample of 500 U.S. adults, age 8 and older, a 95% confidence interval for the mean systolic blood pressure, the upper number in a blood pressure measurement is 119.6 to 123.6 millimeters of mercury. Okay, so that's the interval that we're 95% confident on. Interpret this confidence interval. So going back to that, so we are 95% confident the interval from 119.6 to 123.6 captures or contains the true mean systolic blood pressure of all U.S. residents age 8 and older. So the true mean, I like saying the true there because we're talking about the population, the true mean systolic blood pressure. So the true mean there. If you add the word true, we know you're talking about the population there. So it's a really good word to use. Based on a random sample, this is the same information there. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, normal systolic blood pressure is less than 120. based on this interval, is there convincing evidence that the mean systolic blood pressure of all U.S. residents is greater than 120? So 120 is in the interval, right? Do you see how that's a plausible value? So if you have a number and it's in the interval, that's plausible. That's like, yeah, we expect it to be between 119 and 123. So 120 is no big deal there. So because there are values in the interval from 119 to 123, they're less than or equal to 120. This is not convincing evidence. So we don't have enough convincing evidence to say that actually we think it's greater than 120. It might be greater than 120, but we don't have enough evidence to prove that because the 120 is within our expected range, our confidence interval there. So nothing unusual there. Again, the confidence interval goes plausible or normal, these like typical values for systolic blood pressure, not the blood pressure of individual residents. In fact, fewer than 10% of individuals in the sample had a systolic blood pressure between 119 and 123.6. Now think about that for a second. Mean systolic blood pressure, not the blood pressure of individual residents. I didn't see the data, so I guess that could be true. The confidence level C gives the approximate percentage of confidence intervals that will capture the population parameter in a repeated sampling of the with the sample same size. Okay, so this is interpreting the confidence level. So we kind of switch gears, not interpreting the confidence interval. This is interpreting the confidence level and describing the confidence level. So like when we say 95% confident, 95% is our confidence level there. So to interpret a confidence level, say, if we were to select many random samples of the same size for the same population, we've done that before, we construct a 95% confidence interval using each sample. About 95% of the intervals would capture the parameter in context. You may be asked to interpret the confidence interval or the confidence level or both, so you have to understand the difference. Confidence interval is a set of plausible values, and the confidence level describes the overall capture rate of the method. So I like that idea of a capture rate. So this is a capture rate of sorts. So if we just select many random samples, same size for the same population, 95% confidence interval using this each sample, about 95% of those intervals would capture the true mean, whatever. So like if you think about it in polling, so what that means is if there were 100 different companies that did presidential polls, they might come up with 100 different confidence intervals, slightly different if we went to the decimals there. So maybe they're somewhere around 48%, but they could be, give or take anything there for the point estimator with an interval there that. So if we did many polls, say 100 polls, if it's 95% confident, we would say about 95% of those confidence intervals would contain the true proportion. I think we have to see this. There is a way we can do this in stats and kind of show you what that means. So we'll try to do that, I'm sure, in a minute here. We learned that the 95% confidence interval for the mean systolic blood pressure of all U.S. residents age 8 and older is 119 to 123.6. Interpret the confidence levels. That's not the interval from 119 to 123. That's the interval. The confidence level is 95%. So if we selected many random samples of size 500 and construct many 95% confidence intervals using each sample, about 95% of the intervals would capture the mean systolic blood pressure of all residents age 8 and older. Yeah, so we can interpret the confidence levels before we even know what the intervals are. We say, well, about 95% of the intervals created would contain the true proportion or true mean. So it does not tell us the probability that a particular confidence interval captures the population parameter, just that if we did many confidence intervals, about that percentage would contain the true proportion. Okay, a poll by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Harvard Chance School of Public Health surveyed a random sample of U.S. adults and asked their views on healthcare. One question asked in the poll was, are you in favor of substantially increasing federal spending on improving the nation's healthcare programs? Based on the sample, a 95% confidence interval for the proportion of U.S. adults who would say yes to the question is 0.67% to 74%, basically. Interpret this confidence interval. Okay, so if you go back to, so you're going back to the script here. So we say we are C% confident the interval from blank to blank captures the true parameter in context. Okay, so we are 95% confident the interval from 0.674 to 0.746 captures the true proportion of people that are in favor of the nation's public health programs, of increasing spending on the improving national programs. So again, we start with the script is we are blank percent confident. The interval from blank to blank captures the true proportion of blank, right? And they just talk about the context of the problem there. In the previous alternate example, you learned that a 95% confidence interval for the proportion of U.S. adults, blah, blah, blah. We've heard that it's very difficult to get more than 2/3 of U.S. adults to agree on anything. That's probably true. Based on this interval, is there convincing evidence that more than 2/3 of U.S. adults would be in favor of a substantially increasing federal spending on improving the nation's healthcare programs? So 2/3 is 66.7. 66.7, that is not in the interval. That's not in between those two. Because all the values are greater than 2/3, there is convincing evidence that more than 2/3 of U.S. adults will be in favor of substantially increasing federal spending and improving the nation's healthcare program. So because 2/3 is not in our interval, and our intervals, all the values in the interval were bigger than 2/3, right? That's an indication that, yeah, there's something going on here. We think more than 2/3. We think that there is convincing evidence that more than 2/3 of U.S. adults will be in favor of increasing federal spending on healthcare. Highland Village is a suburb of Dallas, Texas. To understand the needs and wants of local residents, the Highland Village Business Association commissioned a survey of 1,480 local residents. From this survey, a 99% confidence interval for the proportion of residents who often or always shop at stores in Highland Village was found to be 0.54 to 0.60. Interpret the confidence level. So again, for the confidence level, let's go back. So this is the script. If we were to select many random samples of the same size from the same population and construct a 99% confidence interval, using the sample, about 99% of the intervals would capture the true blank in context. Okay, so if we did many samples of size 1480 from the same population, and created many 99% confidence intervals for each one of those samples we took, about 99% of the confidence intervals would contain the true proportion of the residents who often or always shop at Highland Village. Let's see what they said. Select many random samples of 1,480 Highland Village residents and construct a 99% confidence interval using each sample, so many confidence intervals. About 99% of the intervals would capture the true proportion of all Highland Village residents who often or always shop in Highland Village. That's your lesson for today.